everyone. Welcome to La Literati. I'm Tasha.
And I'm Steve.
You are Steve. You've been given a new nickname thanks to our last show.
Yeah, for the last show anyway, I was Steve. Normally I'm Niles.
Yeah, I think Elizabeth had some issues with hearing us, and somehow she got Steve from Niles. So we'll have to correct her at some point, but I don't know.
Yeah.
You kind of look like a Steve. No, just kidding, you don't. But, what a show that was. Oh, gosh, let's hope today's show goes much, much better. We know this guest a little bit now because he's been on twice before, so I think hopefully we're comfortable with him. He's comfortable with us, and we don't have any issues. Fingers crossed. So,
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, Steve. Fingers crossed, Steve. Okay, why don't we intro him and get this show on the road, as they say.
Sure, all right. So today we're pleased to welcome back to the show University of Toronto Professor of Philosophy, Mark Kingwell. Mark is the author of numerous essays and books that speak to issues like political discourse, urbanization, culture, and even the joys of walking. His latest book, Measure Yourself Against the Earth, came out last October. Please welcome the always engaging Mark Kingwell.
Hey, guys, how are you?
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mark. We're well. We're well. How are you?
I'm great. Should I go with Steve Niles, or should it be some other? Should I invent another name still?
Maybe every once in a while, Steve will be kind of a change of pace, but I prefer Niles because that's my long ago Tasha given nickname. So
right.
I think I'll stick with Niles.
All right. Well, just to keep you hopping, I might throw in a Steve here and there.
All right. That sounds good.
That's great. That's great. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about your new book, Measure Yourself Against the Earth, which is a great title, by the way. How did you come up with the title, and what can readers expect from the book?
Well, first of all, it's a collection of essays, and I think there's 25 or 26 essays in there published in different places over the past few years, including Harper's and literary magazines like Descant, published up here in Toronto until recently. And it meant to be a companion book to my last collection, Unruly Voices, which was published in 2012. They cover pretty much the same kind of territory. The title is, titles are always hard, but it's great when you get one that you think is just perfect. And the title comes from a book by Rebecca Solnit, who's a writer whose work I really admire. And it's from her book Wanderlust, which is about walking. And the sentence reads in her book, walking is how we measure ourselves against the earth. And you mentioned off the top, several of the essays in the book are about walking and the joys of walking and thinking while walking, and also the political and social issues about cities and walking. What's the role or the status of pedestrians within cities, which are often dominated by cars rather than pedestrians. So it also kind of gathered together some of the ones that weren't specifically about walking, but were about sort of the human relationship with the material environment. So some of my long-standing interests in architecture and the city worked out in different essays in the collection.
Well, I think what I like about you, and I've said this before, you're kind of the everyman's philosopher. I mean, you're very bright, you're very intelligent, but you have this academic side, but when you read your work, you're not just, sometimes it can be overwhelming when you're reading something by a professor of your caliber, but you're very easy to understand, and I think it translates to, everyone. Anyone can read a Mark Kingwell book and go, oh man, I like that. That's nice. And you can make walking interesting too, which is, not always easy to do, so.
Well, thank you for both of those. It's a tricky thing with the first issue because in this case, and in the last book too, there are a couple of essays, 2 or 3 usually in each collection, that are a little more academic or a lot more academic, and I see those as kind of grounding the other ones. But I always say, my experience of reading essay collections is if you start an essay in a collection and it's not grabbing you, then jump around to the next one or the one, somewhere later in the book. I mean, that's what a collection's for. It's not meant to be read cover to cover. And so I really like having that range within one set of covers. And obviously if I'm writing something for Harper's or another kind of general interest magazine, I'm going to be pitching it a different way than if I'm writing for a journal. But I like to think that the pieces fit together. And if people, even if they don't have the specific academic background that I have, that if the writing is clear enough, then you can take yourself into new places by reading things that are maybe a little more academic, or a little more scholarly, I should say, rather than academic.
Scholarly. That's it. Yeah, and like I said, it's very translatable. Very translatable. Let's talk just a little bit about your love of walking, because I have to tell you, I walk too. I walk everywhere. I don't drive, so I really got tickled. I was reading one passage where you were talking about people looking down at their phones, and the way you described that was hilarious. But let's talk a little bit about walking, Mark.
Well, I love to walk, and I love to walk in cities. And I in one of the pieces that's in the book, I talk about my favorite cities or neighborhoods in different cities around the world that I've been lucky enough to visit, and where walking is great. And like I said earlier, and this is explored in a couple of places, there's this long and really wonderful tradition of philosophical reflection and walking. Walking seems to me a very natural kind of activity to do while you're thinking. We think of Rodin's Thinker, the statue kind of embodying philosophical thought. But in fact, it seems to me it's not while sitting down and kind of, flexing our muscles in exertions of intelligence that most thoughts come to us. At least for me, walking is the process through which I work out different ideas in my head. And of course, it is not always an available pleasure. So in the cities of North America, we've created all this exurban sprawl in the years after the Second World War, which are very car-friendly and very pedestrian hostile. And that's created contemporary problems of food deserts, for example, where there are lots of people in my city and in other places where you can't walk anywhere to get food. There's a super grocery store, but it's maybe 3 miles, 4 miles away. And then also issues of mobility. I recently had a foot injury that kept me hobbled for 3 weeks. And, that was painful in lots of ways, but one of them was just realizing that I couldn't walk wherever I wanted or however I wanted. And that made me really mindful of what a blessing it is to be able to walk freely.
Yeah.
So,
It's very true. I love to walk. I write poetry. Usually most of my poems are on walking, especially when you're out in nature or, you're walking in a city. Here's an idea for a poem. But so did you choose which essays went into the book?
Yeah, I look around. It was a fairly fertile period for me, and after Unruly Voices came out in 2012, I wasn't sure that I had enough material. But then I was talking to my editor at Biblioasis, who published both of those books, the recent one and the one from 2012, and we just thought there was probably enough, and we spent a lot of time sifting. And there's a great writer and editor called Jeet Heer, who some of your listeners may know. He's from Toronto here, but he writes and works in Boston now. He's an editor at the Atlantic Monthly. And so we asked Jeet to look over everything and help create the different subsections and to work on ordering, because ordering an essay collection is always an interesting part of it. And I'll tell you the one thing that we disagreed about. He wanted me to drop the essay that in the end I included about punctuation, which is a pet topic of mine, and I thought it was a lot of fun. And he thought it was sort of off to one side, but I think it's not, because the punctuation is so essential to the very idea of communicating, not just writing. It seems to me, but in the spoken speech, the heard period or the heard question mark is kind of a dynamic between our writing lives, or reading lives, and the rest of oral communication. So I thought the punctuation essay had to stay, and that's the one thing I disagreed with about.
Well, I'm glad that they kept it. All right.
Yeah, me too.
Niles?
All right. So go ahead, Tasha.
Oh no, I was just gonna say we have some listeners' questions. Listeners' questions. We sent out a tweet and on Facebook, and so we got a pretty good response. So I guess Mel's just gonna start us off with that.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right. So first of all, let me find my place here. Okay. Ellen Toten wants to know if you would ever consider writing fiction.
That's a question I get asked of quite a lot, and I think the reason is that in my nonfiction, which is all I've ever published, I use narrative elements a lot, and I use dialogue and other things. So I've certainly thought about it. I think, though, I know a lot of fiction writers, and it's not that you can't sort of start a new kind of way of being in the world later in life, but I find the prospect a little daunting, to be honest. I've thought about it. I'm on sabbatical from my university teaching this year, and one of the projects I was considering was having a go at some ideas I've had for writing fiction. And I just found that it was getting stalled, and probably from my own self-intimidation. So I wouldn't rule it out, but it doesn't come as naturally to me, because I always think if I write, for example, there are 2 long pieces in Measure Yourself Against the Earth that are about fishing. And they're not really about fishing, but I use the stories of fly fishing trips that I've been on with my brothers to talk about philosophical ideas. And I love doing that, and I think it works. But if you just turned the corner and made that into fiction, I'm not sure that it would work the way I naturally think about those things. So anyway, I would like to try, and maybe one of these days I'll overcome my inhibitions and start doing it.
Well, just curious, I'm so sorry. Now I have a question. What genre would you, if you read a fiction book, what genre would it be?
Well, I would kind of like to write something like a social satire, social comedy. I'm a big fan of that tradition, especially in 20th century British and American writing. Evelyn Waugh, Dawn Powell. I don't know if people still read Dawn Powell. She's an amazing writer, underappreciated. Henry Green. So that kind of stuff, which you find elements in contemporary writing. Some of, say, sections of Jonathan Franzen's The Corrections, but not so much in later Franzen. So because what I love about that writing is the way you get really important social observation inside something that's quite entertaining because it's funny. And that's what makes Waugh so great. Martin Amis, Kingsley Amis, both Amises, good examples of that. Especially Martin Amis, I think, immensely talented writer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Ellen also wants to know what kinds of books do you read for enjoyment?
I read entirely fiction for enjoyment. I don't read even sort of narrative nonfiction like biographies. I don't have a big taste for biographies. I read tons of novels, and I read a wide variety. I read sort of serious literary fiction, I guess if you want to call it, and I read a lot of genre fiction. I'm really interested in spy thrillers and various kinds of espionage novels, partly because they're often underappreciated for how good they are. Especially, I read a lot of British writers from the 60s and 70s who are almost forgotten nowadays. Gavin Lyle is a great one. Adam Hall. These are fantastic writers who they're so much better than, say, Lee Child. I read Lee Child with pleasure because I like those Reacher stories. But this kind of stuff from Britain in the 60s and 70s was just way more sophisticated and much more challenging. So I guess if I were to write another kind of novel, maybe I'd do this one under a pseudonym. I'd love to write a really hard-boiled espionage novel with lots of violence in it.
All right. We'll keep asking you about that and see if maybe that'll happen. All right. And another question from Ellen. What do you think about the current political climate in the United States, and are you still a Hillary Clinton supporter?
Well, again, I will say, as I always do, I don't have a vote, so this should all be taken as entirely hypothetical. I still think Hillary Clinton is the only person among the remaining candidates who I think is up for the job of being president tomorrow, and I think that's pretty important. I'll tell you a quick story, though. I was down in Minnesota, well, I guess across in Minnesota last week, giving a talk at liberal arts college called St. Olaf, south of Minneapolis. And my talk was about civility, which, as you guys know, is one of my favorite long-standing areas of interest. And I started by just sketching a kind of overview of the current version of the Trump phenomenon. And I was surprised to get some pushback on that because I wasn't criticizing Trump. I was so much as I was just indicating that what is fascinating about Trump is that he really doesn't have any regard for the rules as they've normally been played by. And that poses a particular challenge because the punditry class doesn't really know what to do about it because, you know, they can keep on criticizing him. But he doesn't care, and his base supporters don't care. And it's almost as if they've created a space of political activity which is outside of the usual rules of discourse. And I that seems to me straightforwardly just factual. But it's interesting that the pushback is that you can't criticize him. And I guess I'm Canadian, so. But it's not just non-Americans. I've heard my New York friends being told that they can't criticize Trump because they're liberal elitists from the East Coast, and so on and so on. So I think that's kind of a dangerous thing, that somehow somebody should be viewed by his own supporters as beyond criticism.
It's scary. He scares me. He really does.
Well, he scares a lot of people, doesn't he? It's utterly fascinating, though, if you're just a spectator of politics. I should say the other thing that this one person objected to is I made a joke about, not something I've made up, friends of mine and others, people saying that they're going to move to Canada if Trump is ever president.
I've said that.
Yeah.
And this person thought that I was being, smug or arrogant or something, suggesting that people should come to Canada. And I was like, wow, I didn't ask you to want to come to Canada or even to I don't think most people are serious about it anyway. You got to fight the battles that you're born to fight. So.
Yeah. I don't know. You might have to build a wall, Mark. You guys might have to build a wall.
Yeah. Well, we'll get Trump to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, God bless America. Anyway.
All right. One last question from Ellen. She wants to know if you read any of Sylvain Renard's books.
I was waiting for the Sylvain Renard.
You're not going to let that go, are they?
Yeah. I started one, and I have to confess, and I've said this before on the air with you guys. I know Sylvain, and I consider Sylvain a friend, but I just couldn't read it. I just found it really. I don't know. It's not my cup of tea, I guess. That's what I'll say about that. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, Bill. We call him Bill. So. Go ahead.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but there's just no way that anybody at the University of Toronto would behave that way. Which I guess is what makes it kind of appealing. But yeah.
Oh gosh, we love you, Sylvain. We really do. We do. It's a little. When I read it, I actually wasn't a fan of the first book. I really wasn't. I never write negative reviews, and I actually read a negative review, and then I felt so bad about it, I took it down. But when I read the second and third, he kind of converted me because he has kind of a lyrical way of writing. I was a little creeped out by the professor-student thing. I really was. But I don't know. He is. I think the way he puts in cultural references and artistic references is quite clever. So we love you, Bill. So.
It's much better than so much of the other stuff that's sort of in the similar kind of
absolutely
style. So that should be said. If anybody's looking for that kind of diversion, by all means.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Misty wants to know if you think that we become immune to violence.
Immune to violence?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you said? You mean on television or in the movies?
I think she's more talking about, we had 9/11, and then after that, we have all these things on the news, and we're really, for the moment, we're just horrified, and then we kind of just brush it aside.
Right.
And
yeah.
I think that's what she's talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. This is something I think about a lot, because even in the time when I was kind of paying close attention to this, I think things have changed a lot. We've gone from really being deeply shocked by things to not being shocked at all. And even the example I'm going to give is from fiction, because it's from a TV show, but I think it's a real, it relates to the real world. I hope this isn't a spoiler. I should say spoiler alert. If you haven't watched the most recent season of House of Cards, rather, you might not know this, but at the very end, some terrorists, some homegrown American terrorists who are aligning themselves with ISIS or radical Islam, behead a prisoner that they've captured, kidnapped, on television. And the last scene of the last episode shows the president and the vice president, who's also his wife, highly implausible, watching this televised violence, and they don't flinch, and they just look steadily at the screen. We don't see it, by the way, which is interesting. That the producers of House of Cards decided not to show that, but just show the reactions to that. And the suggestion is somehow, in this world, what we need are people tough enough to look at that and not flinch, or at least that's one of the suggestions. I don't know. I think it's important to remain shockable, and I think if we lose our capacity for shock, that's really a hollowing out of our human possibility. So I'm worried about this. I think that people do become, it's not immune, then they become temporarily desensitized to certain kinds of things. And that's really bad. I mean, the flip of it, of course, is that when violence is used to terrorize, which is clearly what ISIS does when they show beheadings on video, the most barbaric thing you could imagine, they're trying to unsettle us. So they're counting on our being shockable. So I think it's something you have to manage. You have to be able to feel the shock, but not be cowed or terrorized by somebody's use of it. And that's this is our world. It's a really nasty world in many ways, and all of these gains that we've made on the political side in terms of liberalism and democracy in the West are constantly being threatened by these people who are just playing by a different set of rules. And I think that's what freaks people out mostly, is that just this sense that you can't even count on it being the same game.
I know.
Yeah. So.
It's terrifying. It really is. And I know with me, like, I can be a little bit overly sensitive to stuff. I mean, I'll watch the news and I'll cry, so I kind of have to just turn it off. Right. But but I do think that if you do become too immune to it, then apathy grows, and I think apathy is really more deadly sometimes than hate. But
I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I really do. Okay, so on a lighter note, Misty also wants to know if you're ever going to tweet.
Yeah. Well, I do have a Twitter handle, and I'm still conducting my little personal experiment to see how many followers I can get without ever tweeting. It seems at this point it just seems kind of counterproductive to start, and I have this conversation with a lot of people all the time about the value of social media. Some people love it. Some people really love Twitter, and Facebook is still probably even more popular here in Toronto among a group of people I know. But I don't know. I know that I would feel if I started tweeting regularly that it was a kind of a burden, partly because I have an addictive personality. I would probably be on there all the time, and I would be one of those people who was unable to put it back in proper perspective. So it's mainly out of fear, I guess, that I don't want to.
Stay away. All right, stay away. Jane from Philadelphia wants to know, outside of teaching, what are you good at? And she also wants to know if you have any weaknesses.
Well, that's a tough one. It feels like a job interview. Weaknesses. Well, I just admitted to being addictive by nature, so that's probably one of them. Although it's a double-edged sword because you can be addicted to work or exercise or other things that are highly socially valued. Anyway, it might be bad for you in the long run. But what else am I good at? I guess I'd like to think that I care a lot about the craft of writing, and that's something I would like to be good at. I'd say a fair fisherman, and I'd like to be a better angler than I am. I'm a pretty good cook. I guess that's another one. I really enjoy cooking, and I get compliments on my cooking, so I'm going to say I'm a pretty good cook. And that's probably all right to go on with. Weaknesses, I guess probably my biggest weakness is, and I'm working on this a lot when I think about the rest of my life, my career. I succumb to anxiety a lot. I've been very anxious about things, and combined with a certain kind of ambition. And as I go into my 50s, that stuff seems less important, and I'm trying to focus more on just doing good work and not being so concerned with external markers of success. I think I'm a lot more thick-skinned than I used to be, and that's been an interesting process. But I'd like to be maybe even more unconcerned about that stuff, and just sort of live for my own sense of what's good.
Well, I wish you luck with that. I have to say that's one thing about Niles that he actually does. He's quite good at. He kind of makes his own rules, and Steve. Steve is a total badass. Yeah, total badass.
Well,
okay.
Thanks for the compliment.
You're welcome. Terry from New York wants to know what your writing process is like.
Well, I'm like a lot of people. I'm very regular about it, and in fact, all the writers I know, even with the different variables, they do the same thing. And I think that's the key: is whatever you do, it should be the same, day in, day out. So I like to write in the morning. Today is an exception because I have other errands later, and so it's just some days I don't write. But whenever I do, I like to write in the morning, and I don't write for that long. I find this started when I was writing my PhD dissertation. 2 or 3 hours in the morning, especially if you get stuff that you can use, you don't have to throw away too much. That's plenty. That's a day's work, and then you have this wonderful feeling around lunchtime that you've already put in your productive day's work, and you can do whatever you want. Go for a walk, go to a movie. I do all the other little tricks, or some of the tricks that people have probably heard. I like to end a day's writing with the first sentence of a new paragraph, so that I can just pick that up when I get started the next day. In terms of other parts of the process, I use outlines a lot. I'm a bit of a stickler for outlines to make sure that everything goes in the right place in the right order. And I think those are the main things. I like to draft. Say it depends on the piece, but say it's a 7,000 or 8,000 word kind of essay. I like to draft the whole thing before I start to even think about revising. But I really enjoy revising. That's my favorite part of writing, going back and tweaking all the little bits and pieces and rewriting sentences.
Yeah. I can identify with that.
I think you said your writing environment you had to have quiet when you. Is that true? No music.
Not absolute quiet. I like to have music on, and where I write in my office, there's I have the radio tuned to French CBC. So what I love about that is the French CBC plays really great music, and then they're speaking in French, means that I could, if I worked, I could understand it because my French is okay, but most of the time it's just words, so it's just like more music, and it doesn't kind of get inside my head. So it's almost like white noise, and that's what I like. French dialogue and French weather forecasts plus music.
Okay, all right. All right, Lisa from Texas wants to know, would you consider posting any of your lectures on YouTube?
Well, there are some on YouTube already. A lot of times, especially in the last while, anything that I do publicly, or almost everything, is taped or recorded somehow and posted. So so you can find some of those. I mean, I don't control that very much, and that's kind of the one thing I don't like about it. But anyway, there are some there on YouTube, and those are usually the ones that are done for how can I put this? I guess higher profile places. Big public lectures. My sort of day-to-day lectures that I give to my students here, those are not ever recorded. So, the students record them sometimes, just the audio. But and those, I actually think those are better lectures because the intimacy you get with an ongoing relationship with a group of students over the course of a semester creates a whole different kind of interaction. But anyway, there are some on YouTube, and if people want to, just search there, you'll find some.
Okay, all
right. So this question comes from Taylor in South Carolina. She wants to know what drew you about to the study of philosophy. Why did you choose philosophy?
Well, it's probably more accurate to say that philosophy chose me. This is very common among my colleagues. I find when I ask them that question. Everybody has different kind of micro version of the story, but the main features are often the same. You get interested in certain questions, and as I've argued many times, and as philosophers have known for millennia, the basic questions are the questions that everybody asks, often when they're children. And the difference is that most people just go on with their lives and ask other questions like, how can I make ends meet? How can I raise a family? And philosophers are weird people who keep on asking those questions. And some of us are lucky enough to be able to make ends meet doing that. But my micro version of the story was when I was an undergraduate, I was really vexed by the question of God's existence, and I really wanted to try to find good arguments for God's existence. So I spent a lot of time in that literature, and I kept coming back to whether or not the arguments were good arguments or not. And I realized along the way that I'd become just really interested in the nature of argument and how people construct rational scaffolds for the things that they believe, or use rationality to question what they believe. I kind of backed into being a philosopher as I was struggling with this question of theism. And that's very typical too. I know a lot of my colleagues would have versions of that experience.
Yeah. All right. So last question. Is there a question you've always wanted to be asked in an interview that you'd love to answer?
It should be something like a red carpet question, right? Like, who are you wearing today? Or what's that aftershave you have on, or something like that? Yeah. And I'll answer those.